Imagine waking up on a moving train. You do not know where this train originated. You did not purchase a ticket for this journey, and you have absolutely no idea who the conductor is or where the tracks ultimately lead. You simply find yourself here, hurtling forward at a breakneck speed through a vast, imposing landscape you do not recognize. This is the fundamental, unsettling reality of human existence. You open your eyes to a life you did not ask for, placed onto a stage where a highly complex, chaotic play has been running for billions of years before your arrival. You are immediately burdened with a specific history, a specific biology, a set of societal expectations, and a random assortment of circumstances that were assigned to you completely without your permission. You were not consulted before your birth, nor did you consent to be precisely who you are, yet here you find yourself forced to navigate the staggering complexity and heavy demands of being alive. Philosophers have a term for this profound, disorienting phenomenon. They call it thrownness. It is the terrifying, inescapable sensation of being thrust into a world, into a fragile physical body, and into a precise moment in time, entirely against your will. This lack of absolute control over our origins and our environment is the source of a deep, humming, existential anxiety that vibrates within all of us. As we grow and develop self-consciousness, we suddenly become acutely aware of ourselves as distinct, isolated entities, separate from the overwhelming and often threatening forces of nature and the countless other people around us. We realize our immense, almost comical smallness when compared to the vast, indifferent universe. From this vulnerable vantage point, the world appears chaotic, unpredictable, and fiercely unconcerned with our individual desires, our carefully laid plans, or our delicate feelings. The sudden realization that we are fragile creatures existing on a tiny rock suspended in an infinite, freezing void can evoke a crushing sense of powerlessness and dread. We are bombarded daily by the unpredictability of fate, forced to contend with economic downfalls, sudden illnesses, the betrayals of others, and the inescapable reality of our own mortality. We discover, much to our dismay, that no matter how much we prepare, worry, and attempt to prevent misfortunes from occurring, the universe will still crash into our lives uninvited and disrupt everything we hold dear. Faced with this terrifying lack of control, the default human reaction is intense, agonizing resistance. We fight bitterly against the reality of our thrownness. We complain endlessly about the unfair hand we were dealt, looking at the fortunes of others with envy, jealousy, and a burning sense of injustice. We look at the tragedies and inconveniences that befall us and cry out to the heavens, demanding to know why such terrible things must happen to us. We tie our entire capacity for happiness to the fragile expectation that life should be fair, that our projects should unfold without interruption, and that the external world should eagerly conform to our internal desires. But this resistance generates an exhausting, spirit-draining friction. When we constantly wish for reality to be different than it undeniably is, we suffer from a painful, tearing disconnect between what we desperately want to happen and what actually happens. We fall into a state of chronic disappointment, viewing our own lives as a series of unjust punishments and endless frustrations. This deep-seated frustration often devolves into a paralyzing sense of apathy or nihilism. We begin to believe that because we are at the mercy of immense, systemic forces far larger than ourselves, our individual actions have no real impact, and our choices do not matter. If we cannot control the global economy, the shifting tides of culture, or the inevitability of personal loss, we ask ourselves what the point of trying even is. This surrender is not simple cowardice, but rather a profound melancholia, a spiritual disenchantment that strips our lives of vital meaning and replaces it with a cold, defensive apathy. We use the undeniable fact that the world is chaotic and unfair as a convenient excuse to stop striving, to lower our expectations to the floor, and to retreat into the warm, comforting safety of victimhood. After all, it is much safer and easier to be a victim of circumstance because the victim is permanently absolved of the terrifying, heavy responsibility of taking supreme ownership over their own life and their own reactions. Yet, underneath this defensive apathy, the existential anxiety remains, gnawing at the edges of our consciousness. We try desperately to sedate this dread with endless distractions, burying ourselves in trivial entertainment, mindless busywork, and the frantic consumption of shallow pleasures, hoping to kill time and silence the agonizing questions of our own existence. We attempt to cover over the terrible reality of our vulnerability with a curtain of fantasy, building psychological trenches and elaborate illusions to defend ourselves from the harsh facts of life. But these evasions only provide a temporary hollow relief. The truth of our thrownness is inescapable. The universe will continually present us with circumstances we did not choose, and the more we struggle against the leash of fate, the more painfully we are dragged along the rough, unforgiving gravel of reality. To escape this miserable cycle of resistance and despair, we must initiate a radical, permanent shift in our perspective. We must look directly at the brutal, unyielding facts of our existence and accept a fundamental, absolute division regarding human power. There are things in this world that are entirely in our power, and there are things that are absolutely not in our power. We do not control our bodies, our property, our reputations, or the massive external events that sweep across the globe. We did not choose our parents, our hometowns, or the tragic events of the past. However, we have absolute, sovereign control over our own thoughts, our impulses, our will to avoid certain behaviors, and the judgments we make about the events that happen to us. This profound realization is the crucial turning point, the narrow, illuminated doorway through which we must pass to reclaim our lost power. When we realize that our emotional suffering is not caused directly by external events, but rather by our own voluntary judgments and opinions about those events, we unlock an invincible superpower. The world cannot force us to feel wronged, humiliated, or destroyed. Only our internal interpretation of the world has the power to do that. If you are confronted with a massive, unexpected setback, the setback itself is an objective, inanimate fact. It is your own mind that attaches the terrifying label of catastrophe to it, and it is that self-imposed label which generates your panic and despair. By learning to separate the objective reality of what happens to us from the subjective story we tell ourselves about it, we begin to build an inner citadel that no amount of external chaos can breach. We realize that while we cannot control the wild, unpredictable theater of the world, we hold ultimate, unquestionable authority over the theater of our own minds. Constructing this inner citadel requires us to recognize a profound psychological mechanism that dictates our entire experience of reality. When an event occurs, whether it is a sudden financial loss, a harsh criticism, or an unexpected delay, the event itself is completely neutral. It is merely a fact of nature, an arrangement of atoms, a moment in time. The suffering we experience does not radiate from the event itself, but entirely from the judgment we instantly and unconsciously attach to it. Imagine walking down a street after a heavy rain and a passing vehicle drives through a deep puddle, splashing you with cold water. You have a choice in how to interpret this moment. You can observe the physical reality and simply conclude that you are now wet. Or you can surrender to a rush of anger, telling yourself that the driver was malicious, that your entire day is completely ruined, and that you are a victim of profound injustice. The first interpretation is an objective observation of a circumstance beyond your control. The second is a subjective judgment that instantly generates emotional torment. We spend our lives reacting to these self-inflicted torments, convinced that the world is attacking us, when in reality, we are attacking ourselves with our own unquestioned opinions. To reclaim our sovereignty, we must learn to inhabit the tiny, almost imperceptible space that exists between a stimulus and our response to it. In that fleeting moment, before the rush of adrenaline and the cascade of catastrophic thoughts take over, our absolute freedom resides. Most people living in a state of existential dread have completely collapsed this space, operating purely on emotional reflex. But when you train yourself to widen that gap, you intercept the automatic machinery of panic. You look at the daunting situation. You feel the initial biological shock of it, but you refuse to give it your intellectual assent. You demand that the impression identify itself. You strip away the terrifying adjectives and the dramatic narratives. Instead of telling yourself that a project failure is an absolute nightmare that will destroy your future, you calmly state the objective facts. A specific endeavor did not produce the desired result, and a new strategy is required. By changing your internal vocabulary, you literally alter the neurochemistry of your brain, moving from a panicked creature trapped in an unpredictable world to a rational architect of your own emotional state. This process requires a ruthless inventory of what we value. The reason we feel so violently thrown about by the chaos of life is that we have attached our deepest sense of self-worth to things that are incredibly fragile and entirely outside of our jurisdiction. We place our ultimate happiness in the hands of our wealth, our social reputation, the approval of our peers, and even the physical health of our own bodies. But these are merely temporary loans from the universe. They can be confiscated at a moment's notice by an economic downturn, a malicious rumor, or a microscopic pathogen. When we base our emotional stability on these external factors, we willingly hand over the keys to our inner citadel to a chaotic, indifferent world. We become absolute slaves to fortune, terrified of losing what we have and desperate to acquire what we lack. True empowerment begins the exact moment we withdraw our desire from these external vulnerabilities and relocate our definition of success entirely inward. We decide that the only true good is the integrity of our own character, our wisdom, and our courage. Because no tyrant, no disaster, and no stroke of bad luck can ever force you to be unjust, cowardly, or cruel, your ultimate well-being becomes completely untouchable. This practice of objective representation and internal valuation forces us to confront another vital illusion that fuels our anxiety, our obsession with the future. Because we possess the remarkable evolutionary gift of foresight, we have the capacity to plan, to build, and to anticipate. But when this imagination is mixed with fear, it spirals into a dark house of mirrors. We begin to suffer from tragedies that have not yet occurred. We lie awake at night asking endless questions about what might happen if we lose our jobs, if our relationships fail, or if our health falters. We borrow pain from a tomorrow that does not exist, ruining the only thing we actually possess, which is the present moment. The ancient masters understood that neither the past nor the future is in our control, and therefore neither should be granted the power to disturb us. When you feel the crushing weight of existential anxiety, you must pull your attention violently back to the present. In the immediate present moment, you are usually safe, breathing, and capable of making a single reasoned choice. The future is a ghost, and the past is an echo. True power is only ever wielded right here and right now. Yet, engaging exclusively with the present moment and prioritizing our internal character does not mean we retreat into passive resignation or stop participating in the world. We must still pursue our goals, love our families, and strive for excellence, but we must do so with a fundamentally different operating system. We undertake our actions with a profound internal reservation, a silent caveat attached to every ambition. We set out to achieve a goal, to build a business, or to cross an ocean, but we add the crucial condition, fate permitting. We commit our full effort, our absolute best intentions, and our relentless work ethic to the task at hand, but we completely detach our self-worth from the final outcome. If the winds are favorable and we reach our destination, we are grateful. If a storm arises and our ship is blown off course, we are not destroyed, because we never demanded that the universe conform perfectly to our desires. We recognize that our job is to pull the bowstring with perfect form and aim the arrow with absolute precision. But the moment the arrow leaves our fingers, it belongs to the wind. Operating with this mental reservation transforms our entire relationship with failure. When you accept that the results of your actions are subject to millions of intersecting variables that you cannot possibly control, a sudden setback ceases to be a personal insult. You stop viewing obstacles as cruel punishments handed down by an unfair universe. Instead, you begin to see them as the very raw material of your existence. This brings us to a profound threshold. It is one thing to learn how to tolerate the chaos of the world. It is one thing to endure the unpredictability of fate with a stiff upper lip and a quiet, defensive endurance. But mere tolerance is not the highest peak of human potential. Endurance is merely a defense mechanism, a way of surviving the storm without being washed away. To forge a truly legendary life, we must go much further. We must transition from a defensive posture to an aggressively offensive one. We must not simply bear the weight of our thrownness, we must learn to devour it. To merely tolerate the heavy hand of fate is to live as a prisoner who has simply decided to stop complaining about his chains. True liberation requires a much more radical, almost terrifying psychological leap. We must learn to actively love the very things that once caused us despair. We must look at the chaotic, unchosen circumstances of our thrownness and declare with absolute conviction that we would not have it any other way. This is the alchemy of human greatness. It is the transition from a mindset of survival to a mindset of absolute sovereignty, where we no longer just brace ourselves against the storms of life, but learn to harness their wild, unpredictable energy for our own ascent. A strong gust of wind will extinguish it instantly, leaving nothing but a wisp of smoke and a cold wick. But imagine a raging, massive bonfire. When that exact same gust of wind hits the bonfire, it does not blow it out, it feeds it. It makes the flames rise higher, burn hotter, and roar with greater ferocity. The fire consumes the obstacle and transforms it into fuel. This is the exact psychological transformation we must undergo. When we operate from a place of fragile endurance, desperately wishing for the world to be fair, the unexpected tragedies of life threaten to blow us out. We are crushed by the sudden loss, the unfair dismissal, or the chronic illness. But when we cultivate a fierce, aggressive love for our own destiny, everything the universe throws at us becomes combustible material for our growth. A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it, and you must become that fire. This concept of loving one's fate is the ultimate shield against the existential dread of our thrownness. It asks us to completely abandon the useless, exhausting habit of looking back at the past with regret and looking at the present with resentment. The family you were born into, the financial hardships you faced, the betrayals you endured, and the physical limitations you possess were all assigned to you without your consent. But instead of wishing for a different script, instead of wasting your precious psychic energy dreaming of an alternate reality where things were easier, you must take supreme, uncompromising ownership of the script you were given. You must look at the totality of your life, the good and the terrible, and say, I choose this. I choose the pain, I choose the unfairness, and I choose the struggle, because these are the exact, specific ingredients required to forge my character. By loving the unchosen, You retroactively strip it of its power to make you a victim. You absorb the chaos and make it your own. How do we actually execute this shift in our daily lives? It requires a profound rewiring of how we perceive advantage and disadvantage. When a sudden crisis derails your carefully laid plans, the defensive mind panics and asks how to survive the damage. The offensive mind, armed with a radical love of fate, asks how to use it. It recognizes a profound universal truth. The impediment to action actually advances action. The obstacle on the path is not a barrier preventing you from reaching your destination. The obstacle literally becomes the way forward. If you are betrayed by someone you trusted, it is a brilliant opportunity to practice radical independence and emotional self-reliance. If a project you poured your soul into collapses, it is a magnificent chance to practice non-attachment and to build something leaner and stronger from the ashes. You stop demanding that the path be clear and easy, and you start rejoicing that the path is challenging, because only a challenging path demands that you evolve. We forget that biological and psychological systems are designed to grow stronger under stress. A muscle atrophies in a state of absolute comfort. It requires the trauma of resistance, the tearing of fibers under a heavy load, to build density and power. The human spirit operates on the exact same principle. We spend our entire lives desperately trying to engineer a frictionless existence, saving our money and planning our days to avoid all possible discomfort, entirely forgetting that a frictionless life creates a weak, hollow character. The storms of fate are not punishments handed down by an angry universe. They are the heavy weights in the gymnasium of the soul. When you embrace this truth, you stop hiding from the chaos. You step out into the rain and open your arms to the tempest, knowing with absolute certainty that whatever strikes you will only make you more formidable. You begin to understand that an easy life teaches you nothing, while a difficult life teaches you everything. This enthusiastic acceptance of whatever happens produces an indestructible inner peace. If you genuinely love whatever fate hands you, the universe is completely stripped of its ability to threaten you. How can the world intimidate a person who views every setback as a gift, every tragedy as a profound lesson, and every loss as an opportunity to test their own resilience? You cannot be coerced, you cannot be frightened, and you cannot be broken, because you have harnessed the very unpredictability of life. You become, in the truest and deepest sense of the word, unconquerable. You are no longer a passive, terrified passenger on that runaway train we spoke of earlier, trembling in the dark as the landscape blurs past. You have walked to the front of the train, taken your place beside the roaring engine, and chosen to ride the rails exactly as they are laid out. You look at the daunting tracks ahead, plunging into the unknown, and you smile. But to fully cement this immense power and translate it into a legendary, impactful life, we must learn how to direct this liberated energy toward our daily actions, our interactions with others, and our ultimate, inevitable end. Directing this profound energy begins with a radical redefinition of what it means to succeed in the world. For most of your life, you have likely tied your definition of success to external rewards. You sought the promotion, the perfect relationship, the applause of the crowd, and the accumulation of wealth. But as you embrace your fate, you realize that placing your happiness in the hands of things you cannot control is a recipe for endless anxiety. True success is an entirely internal metric. It is the absolute, quiet certainty that you have done your best with the materials you are given. When you undertake any endeavor, you must now operate with a silent reservation in your mind. You set your goal, you meticulously plan your execution, and you pour every ounce of your energy into the effort, but you always add a crucial caveat: I will achieve this, fate permitting. If the universe steps in and shatters your plans, you do not view it as a failure. You recognize that your only true obligation was the integrity of your effort. The outcome was never yours to possess, but the nobility of your attempt is yours forever. This detachment from outcomes does not make you passive. It makes you incredibly dangerous to the status quo. When you are no longer terrified of failing, when you no longer desperately need the validation of the crowd, you become free to take massive, calculated risks. You stop playing defense against the world and start playing a magnificent offense. If a project collapses, you immediately look for the hidden advantage within the rubble. If a door slams in your face, you do not stand outside banging on the wood. You turn around and find the new path that the closed door has forced you to discover. You realize that the world is a relentless training ground, and every difficult person, every unexpected delay, and every painful loss is merely a sparring partner designed to test your resilience and sharpen your skills. You stop asking life to be easy, and you start demanding that life make you formidable. As this invulnerable mindset solidifies within you, a profound sense of interconnectedness begins to emerge. When you are no longer consumed by the frantic, exhausting need to protect your own ego and secure your own comfort, you suddenly have an abundance of energy to offer the world. You begin to understand that you are not a solitary, isolated fragment fighting against the universe, but an essential, functioning part of a magnificent whole. Your success is no longer defined merely by what you can extract from society, but by the steady, unglamorous, and heroic work you contribute to it. You realize that doing the right thing, even when it is difficult, even when no one is watching, and even when it brings no immediate reward, is its own complete and perfect victory. But you become a beacon of stability for others who are still thrashing violently against the currents of their own thrownness. Your calm, your courage, and your unwavering acceptance of reality become contagious, pulling those around you out of their despair and inspiring them to rise. But to accomplish this, you must awaken to the supreme urgency of the present moment. We spend so much of our lives waiting for the perfect conditions to finally begin living. We tell ourselves that we will be happy when the chaos subsides, when the debts are paid, when we reach a certain age or achieve a certain milestone. This is a tragic illusion. The conditions will never be perfect, and the chaos will never fully subside. The future is an unpromised ghost, and the past is a closed book. All you possess is this exact fleeting moment. You must stop preparing for a life that might happen tomorrow and start demanding excellence from yourself today. Do not complain about a lack of time. The time you have is entirely sufficient if you do not waste it on trivial anxieties and useless resentments. Approach this very day as if it were a complete life in itself. Leave no important words unsaid, no vital task unfinished, and no challenge unmet. The realization of your thrownness is no longer a source of dread. It is the ultimate call to awaken. Yes, you were placed onto a stage you did not design. Yes, you were handed a script you did not write. And yes, the train is hurtling forward through a dark and unpredictable landscape. But you are no longer cowering in the passenger car. You have walked to the front. You have looked out at the terrifying, beautiful horizon, and you have taken the controls of your own mind. You understand that while you cannot choose the weather, the delays, or the track ahead, you possess absolute sovereign authority over how you will ride. You will meet every storm with a defiant smile. You will consume every obstacle and turn it into light and heat. You will love your fate, whatever it may be, and in doing so, you will forge a life of unbreakable peace and undeniable greatness.